Welcome to your astrological forecast for the week of Monday, April 17th through Sunday, April 23rd, 2023. This week is a very revolutionary week. We are very much entering a new phase. This is, one of those times where it's intense and very meaningful life changes, I think, will happen to most, if not all of us. Of course, the setting and what these changes look like will of course depend on how each of our individual astrology is interacting with the current transits, but as a whole this is definitely a new phase. So let's go through just kind of a rundown of what's happening this week. So we do have a new moon solar eclipse happening at 29 degrees Aries. For those of you not familiar, we do have what many astrologers like myself call eclipse seasons twice a year, actually, where we get two or sometimes even three eclipses. So this is the first eclipse of this eclipse season. This one is at 29 degrees Aries, and a new moon is of course a new beginning, but because this is an eclipse, it intensifies that meaning and it becomes much more dramatic and potent. I think it becomes even further intensified when you consider that this new moon solar eclipse is happening at 29 degrees Aries, which has also a lot to do with initiation and starting a new cycle and a new phase. And the fact that it's at the very last degree of Aries intensifies it even more and means that things are reaching critical mass. I'm going to talk more about that eclipse when we get to that day in the forecast, but I don't want to spend too much time on that in the intro here. On the same day of the new moon solar eclipse, because that eclipse is happening at the last degree of Aries, the sun will enter Taurus immediately after that exact moment of the eclipse. So sun enters Taurus this week. Happy birthday, Tauruses, for all of you coming up here. This is your time to shine, so to speak. Entering Taurus, things will be a little bit more we're seeking things that are more grounding or practical in nature. Typically things would kind of slow down and settle down, but when you consider that we're entering eclipse season, that kind of changes the meaning here kind of dramatically. On the same day that sun enters Taurus, once it reaches 0 degrees Taurus, it will square Pluto, which is still at 0 degrees Aquarius. I think most of you are aware that Pluto just entered Aquarius a few weeks ago. So Pluto is also indicating that we're entering a huge new phase, new cycle that will last from this year until 2044. That's how long the Pluto and Aquarius transit is. So I think in many ways we've already gotten a pretty big glimpse of what this new, Aquarius Pluto phase will be, but we also haven't yet, it hasn't yet fully been realized. Sun squaring Pluto will channel in, it will funnel in that energy and really give us an idea of what this new phase is going to be about. So that's very exciting as well. As if all that weren't enough, the day after all that happens, because all that happens in one day, the day after that, Mercury turns retrograde at 15 degrees Taurus, where it will stay retrograde until May 14th. So again, there's so much intense stuff going on. I'm trying not to talk too much about it because I don't want this video to get too long. So I'm going to break it down into the day-by-day forecast just because there is so much going on here. Okay, let's start out with Monday, April 17th. So today we start out the week with moon still in Pisces. So, like I was saying at the end of last week, it's actually, pretty nice looking to have sun in Aries with moon in Pisces. Both the sun and moon are, they do fairly well in their respective signs. Sun is exalted in Aries. Moon's not technically in domicile or exalted in Pisces, but, these are two pretty strong energies. So there's strong masculine energy, strong feminine energy. There's kind of a nice balance here, I would say. Moon is pretty much, at the last part of its cycle. It's in its last phase before it will reach that new moon. And combining that with moon in Pisces, both of these have to do with endings, periods having to do with rest and integration, building intuition, more activity in the mind or emotionally rather than physically. At the end of the lunar cycle, the activity tends to be more non-physical in nature because we are more focused on manifesting what will be birthed after the new moon. So Monday honestly looks kind of dreamy or even sleepy, a little bit, since moon is still in Pisces. Afternoon Eastern Standard Time, moon will cross over Neptune, so that funnels in even more dreamy and fantastical kind of, imaginative energy. Very much kind of sleepy or dreamy, not super focused on being productive like we might typically be on a Monday for sure. Okay, and then going to Tuesday, April 18th. By now, moon is in Aries. I forgot to mention moon will enter Aries late on Monday, Eastern Standard Time. So Tuesday, all day, we have moon in Aries, but we won't have that actual new moon solar eclipse just yet. So this is still a dark moon. Moon is at the very last part of its cycle. So again, still very... how do I put it? Like, it's like we're on the cusp of this new kind of beginning. So it's like you can kind of feel that something is about to begin in a very intense way, but it just hasn't yet been manifested. It hasn't yet been realized, if that makes sense. Considering that we also have an Aries stellium now, this intensifies things as well. So it's like the energies are, wanting this huge new beginning, but we're just not quite there yet. It's still, in the ether, so to speak. It's in our minds, but something is about to emerge. Many things are about to emerge from this new beginning that we're just on the cusp of at this point. So to put it in more mundane terms, I think Tuesday may feel a little bit anxious for many of us. For those of us that are more, open and adaptable, you may actually be able to get some really great insight and intuition. But, for many of us that are having to, work and go about our lives, this can feel unsettling because it's not something that's yet clear, and I think with the way our society works, we need things to be clear. We need things to be linear, and we need to plan everything. And when you get energies like this, it just doesn't work that way. So, this can be kind of difficult. I think this is also exacerbated by the fact that later in the day, Eastern Standard Time, on Tuesday, moon will square Mars and then approach Chiron very late in the evening. So both of these things add a little bit of tension and restlessness and sensitivity as well. We may be kind of easily triggered, and again, like I say, I think it's because we can sense that something big is coming, but we can't yet tell what it is. So I think that can kind of freak us all out, generally speaking. Okay, going to Wednesday, April 19th. We are still kind of in that same sort of energy, generally speaking, that we were on Tuesday. Moon is still in Aries, but we still won't get that new moon solar eclipse yet. So it's like it's just building and building and intensifying now. By now on Wednesday, moon has at least crossed over Chiron. It's past that aspect, and it's past, it's out of orb from squaring Mars as well. But I really don't think that tension will be relieved for most of us here. Wednesday, just afternoon Eastern Standard Time, moon will cross over Jupiter in Aries. So that would typically that would have to do with a lot of expansion in a physical way. But because the moon is so close to that new moon aspect, in other words, because the moon is basically has no light at all, it really won't be visible today at all. That makes me suggest that moon crossing over Jupiter does have to do a lot with expansion today, but it's in the mind, it's in the subconscious, it's in your intuition. We may have very vivid dreams or imaginations at this time, especially for those of us that are intuitive, which I'm sure if you're listening to this, I'd say most, if not all of you, are intuitive and open to these things if you're interested in things like this. So just pay attention to the subconscious Tuesday and especially Wednesday, because that's where the activity is going to be. That's where, things are really brewing and things are very ripe. Things are about to kind of emerge, so to speak. Okay, and going to Thursday, April 20th, this is the big day, 420. This is where everything really kind of happens and changes and shifts. It looks like very early Eastern Standard Time, just a little bit after midnight, we will get that new moon solar eclipse at 29 degrees Aries. So this is something that we're already basically in the midst of it Wednesday, but Thursday, it's basically happened now. And I think sometimes when we approach a major aspect like this, in the days leading up to it, it can feel very heavy. It can feel kind of sometimes depressing or anxious because I'm not sure exactly why. It just hasn't yet happened. It hasn't yet been realized. That it's like there's this pressure building subconsciously. Once we pass through this aspect, it's like there's this almost like a death and then rebirth, or some kind of transformation or revival. So you may wake up feeling very refreshed on Thursday comparing to how you felt on Wednesday, if that makes sense. I think for many of us that will be the experience. Of course, as always, look to where 29 degrees Aries falls in your chart, because wherever that is, that represents the area of your life that there will be a new beginning in a very dramatic way. If it's in your 10th house, there's going to be a new shaping of your relationship with your career and your public life. If it's in your first house, this is going to be a new you, a new expression of your identity. Wherever it is, it's very literal, I would say. Things like this. For all of us in general, as I mentioned in the intro, this is a very huge new beginning. What's really interesting to me is oftentimes the new moon typically isn't the date where all the intense physical activity happens. It's more where things are sort of conceived. It's where the seed is planted, if that makes sense. So oftentimes we don't fully realize the extent of what a dramatic new beginning a new moon is until the quarter moon and then the full moon. I really think quarter moons are not paid attention to enough, because I would say they rival the full moon for the most intense part of the cycle. So pay attention to a week from today, because that's where basically, like, what's starting Thursday will dramatically change the whole situation 1 week from today when we get that quarter moon. Hopefully that makes sense. But the new moons are still important to pay attention to, because this is truly the new beginning in the sense of planting the seed. This is where it all starts. This is where an invention is created, or an idea is thought of that will start turning things in motion in a new way. I just want to emphasize, though, that these things can be subtle. I have seen new moons be dramatic as well and trigger dramatic events, and that can definitely be in the cards, considering that this is at 29 degrees Aries and it is an eclipse. But it can kind of go either way. I hope that makes sense for you. Okay, but immediately after the new moon solar eclipse, Sun does enter Taurus. So this shifts to, what would typically be a much more grounding energy. I think part of why this eclipse season is potentially distressing for many of us is the nodes are in Taurus and Scorpio. So although this eclipse is at the very end of Aries, so it's highlighting, Aries as a sign, individuality, self-expression, issues surrounding, those types of things. Although that's where this particular eclipse is, the eclipse season as a whole is centered around the Taurus-Scorpio axis. And in 2 weeks, that's where this, full moon will highlight Taurus and Scorpio. So as a whole, what we're actually moving into is major changes having to do with possessions, income, basically how we stabilize ourselves, how we support ourselves in a long-term way. Much of that is financial and possessive, but much of it is emotional as well. How we stabilize ourselves, how we take care of ourselves long term. So what do we need? Obviously, we need to take care of ourselves physically. We need food, clothes, shelter, but we also need to be supported, emotionally. We are social beings as well. So that's where this more scorpionic part of it comes in. Supporting ourselves through other people or with other people, having to collaborate with one another, having to work together or share resources. So the reason why it's particularly distressing for many of us to have changes in these areas is because Taurus and Scorpio are fixed signs. So that means that the themes that are represented by these signs we like to be consistent. We need, when we're supporting ourselves in a long-term way, we need to find things that are reliable, people that are reliable, income that's reliable, etc. Pleasure that's reliable and consistent. And when you have the nodes in these signs and Uranus and Taurus as well, and then you get these eclipses, it means that there are these dramatic changes, whether you like it or not. So this can be viewed as unfortunate. It can be uncomfortable, but these changes are necessary, though. We have to kind of roll with the punches if we hope to evolve and become better, basically. Although it may be scary or intimidating to go through these changes, I do think that they can be sort of a bridge to finding something maybe better for our highest good in the long run. In other words, like, although you may be used to something now, that a situation that seems very nice that may be working for you, if you stay with that, you may never know about something that could have been much better, something that's more in your highest interest, that maybe help you to evolve even further. And I really think that in these times in general that all of us are experiencing and have been experiencing for a long time, these things are pushing us to change and evolve and grow. Things really are not stable. I think that's pretty clear. Okay, so Sun moving into Taurus. Yes, the issue, the themes are more about stabilization, but the way we would typically stabilize ourselves, is dramatically changing, if that makes sense. So that's where you get that kind of contradiction, astrologically speaking. Okay, and then one thing I did highlight in the intro as well is that, once Sun is at 0 degrees Taurus, it squares Pluto at 0 degrees Aquarius. So, when you get such a strong aspect to an outer planet that has just entered a new sign, it makes that new beginning that much more real, that much more tangible and potent, because now Pluto's energies are being channeled through the Sun, so to speak, or they're connecting or conversing with one another, you could say. So in a way, Sun and Taurus represents, as Sun at 0 degrees Taurus represents a kind of critical mass, a breaking point of this new beginning that is Pluto in Aquarius, this 20-year-long Aquarius season, you could say. So to be totally honest, I'm not sure exactly what this will manifest, but I would speculate that it has to do with new changes with technology. This can go either way. This could represent technology becoming more invasive, more intrusive, but it can also represent the unveiling of technological corruption and control. Wherever Pluto is, it sort of destroys much of the themes of that area. So for the last 15 years or so with Pluto in Capricorn, we all sort of realized the corruption of our political system and our economic system. For many years before that, Pluto was in Sagittarius, and many of us left the church. We saw corruption in the church. Church has to do with Sagittarius. For years before that, Pluto was in Scorpio, so there was, the whole AIDS epidemic. So now, you can see where I'm going with this. With Pluto and Aquarius, Aquarius does have everything to do with technology and groups, society, things like that. But Pluto and Aquarius will show us the darkness that we've been experiencing already in these areas. So, yes, many astrologers are predicting more technology, and that could be true, but there could also be the downfall of technology becoming less reliable, and, all of us becoming more aware of the many downsides that have already been at play through technology, if that makes sense. Okay, but anyway, in a nutshell, any of these themes are kind of up for grabs when Sun squares Pluto. These things can become more relevant. How exactly they become more relevant, I can't predict. But those are the themes, generally speaking. So, especially when you consider that this is a square, this is a contentious aspect. This is, a time of rapid change, societally speaking and historically speaking. Okay, so, to put it in much more mundane terms, Thursday is a crazy day, okay? I think this is something that, anyone would be able to recognize. You don't have to know astrology to know that when it's happening. But it's always good to look at these things so we can be at least aware. I also want to point out that all the planets are kind of clustered again. This is, strengthened every time the moon passes through this area. Things are progressing and moving forward, but we still have almost all the planets, from the end of Aries to the beginning of Gemini, basically. So, these are the first 3 signs of the zodiac. This is yet another indicator that we are in a new phase, in a new cycle. Friday, April 21st, as we're experiencing sort of the aftershocks of this new moon solar eclipse, and the moon is gaining just a little bit of light, moon will, it's still in Taurus, so we're still, kind of experiencing these sudden changes, but as we're just barely, not even fully really recovering from these changes with the new moon solar eclipse, Mercury will turn retrograde at 15 degrees Taurus as well. So like I mentioned before, Mercury has been in the pre-shadow. We've been speeding forward, venturing through uncharted territory, so to speak. Now Mercury is stationary, and basically all week Mercury is basically not moving really. So when Mercury or any other planet as well turns retrograde, it's not like they go from full speed direct to full speed retrograde in an instant. They slow down, they stop, and then they slowly start moving backward, at least from our perception. So this intensifies the energy. This intensifies the intellectual energy, the information, the way we communicate with one another. I would say even our habits and our daily kind of rhythm, all of that becomes intensified when Mercury is stationary, like it is this week. So this intensification of the mental energy will peak on Friday, but this is something that's really affecting all week. Okay. And in the days following Friday, with Mercury beginning to move retrograde, that means, of course, that we're slowing down and we're really processing things in a deep way. I think in a way that actually intensifies the eclipse season, because we're applying this deep and intuitive, Mercury retrograde way of perceiving the world. We're applying that to eclipse season, which is bringing about all this newness and change. So although at first glance it may seem contradictory, these things can actually go hand in hand. Both the eclipse season as well as Mercury retrograde boost intuition. They bring unexpected change and unpredictability. What else? And I think both kind of help us. They push us in a more spiritual or kind of psychic direction. They boost our psychic awareness. Okay. Let's see what else. And Mercury retrograde is, of course, going to be in Taurus this time. So this means that we're particularly slowing down and focusing on, how do we support ourselves? That's also part of what this eclipse season is focusing on. So in other words, many factors in the astrology, including Mercury retrograde and where these things are happening, they point to dramatic changes in how we support ourselves, how we make money, how the whole economy runs, as well as how we support ourselves emotionally too. Very dramatic changes for all of us in those areas. Okay, Saturday, April 22nd, moon will finally enter Gemini, looks like in the late morning Eastern Standard Time. So we're still kind of just on the dawn of this new lunar phase. So I don't think we've fully realized just how much everything has shifted yet. Like I mentioned before, we'll really realize this once we get that first quarter moon in Leo next week. But whether we've realized it or not, everything has just dramatically changed. We're in a kind of new world, or what's about to be a new world for sure. I do think Moon in Gemini does lighten things up a little bit. Moon in Gemini is a very flexible placement. Moon is in Joy in Gemini. So this makes things a little bit more easygoing. It brings a little bit of detached energy, which I think, considering everything else that's been going on, especially with all these Aries and Taurus energies, I think some kind of easygoing, flexible Gemini energy could be a breath of fresh air for many of us, of course, depending on our astrology. This will especially be true because Moon will approach and then pass Venus. Not yet on Saturday, but over the weekend we'll start to experience this Moon nearing Venus energy. So bringing some of that like sweet, stabilizing, type of energy as well. So definitely a breath of fresh air. It's almost like we get a break from these dramatic changes that just happened in the middle of the week, and more dramatic changes that will happen next week. It's like we get this little relative break. Things are still intense. We're still in the midst of dramatic change, but we at least get this period of relative detachment and playfulness that comes from Moon in Gemini on Saturday. So lastly, for Sunday, April 23rd, Moon continues through Gemini. We do get that exact conjunction between the Moon and Venus just before noon Eastern Standard Time. So again, very beautiful, and it channels in that Venus and Gemini energy, which is all about being chatty, connecting with other people. These energies show that we want variety. We want to play around and experiment and try new things. We want to partake in intellectual experiences, learning something new, learning tidbits, participating in activities that are more scattered in nature rather than delving super deep into things. So really, I think Venus and Moon being in Gemini is a blessing because combining, so many planets in Aries and Taurus like they have been for so long, it is very intense. It can be very productive and very active for us, and it can be very inspiring. It can trigger a new cycle, which can be good, but it's very intense as well. It can be very heavy. So Gemini kind of lightens up things a little bit just in time for pretty much the whole weekend, really. Sunday, we do have one aspect, so that would be Mercury sextiling Mars. So really, I should mention that, this aspect, Mercury is within orb of the sextile to Mars all week surrounding the, Friday the 21st where Mercury turns retrograde. This is because the point that Mercury turns retrograde is so close to the sextile with Mars that it's basically with an orb, and Mercury's barely moving at this point since it's just stationed retrograde. So I do think this is interesting. So this is like funneling in that kind of defensive energy. Mars in Cancer is extremely defensive, and it's not always clear on what it's defensive about. Typically there's this theme having to do with fighting for family, but it can also be fighting against family as well. So when we combine that with Mercury retrograde, I think we may be reevaluating what we are fighting for, what we are loyal to, what we have that kind of familial bond with, things of that nature. But really, I think astrologically we need to step back and kind of take everything into account and then combine it all, consider the relationship of all of these things that I'm describing. It's really a lot. I think in the most general way I could put it, I think this is definitely a new beginning. It's a time of simultaneous slowing down and appreciating things and understanding things on a very deep level, but at the same time, things are, there's these waves and walls of new energy that are continuing to hit us as well. So we are slowing down and really experiencing all of it, but at the same time, it's almost impossible to fully understand it all as it's happening because there's just simply so much new energy here. All right, so yeah, a lot of very intense things happening here. That's pretty much all I have for this week. I hope that makes sense for you. I hope that helps. But stay tuned next week. Sun will cross over the North Node. I always mention that because it's kind of a checkpoint. It marks the sort of technical midpoint of eclipse season. So that is an important marker, and it means that we're kind of in the middle of this storm, so to speak. Next week, we'll also get a first quarter moon in Leo at 7 degrees Leo. So that's where, things will really get intense and real, and we'll really see the full, potency of what is truly manifesting from the new moon. So the new moon solar eclipse is where that seed was planted. That plant will sprout and kind of burst from the ground on that first quarter moon. This is how the lunar cycle always works, but these things, again, are just extremely dramatized and intensified during the eclipse season. So very exciting. And yeah, I am definitely an optimist. I think these things will bring about some much needed change for all of us as well. So my advice, as usual, would be just roll with the punches, go with it. We must be adaptable and, take advantage of these new changes that are coming, because we can definitely have a lot of very optimal changes coming our way if we seek them. Okay, so have a great week, and I look forward to talking to you later. Thank you for listening.